Welcome to Coastal Front, where today we're honored to host Carol Lee, philanthropist, entrepreneur, and chair of the Vancouver Chinatown Foundation. Carol co-founded the foundation in 2011 with a mission to revitalize Vancouver's historic Chinatown culturally, economically, and physically. She has spearheaded key projects like the 58 West Hastings project and a social housing initiative that also includes a large healthcare center. Besides her philanthropic work, Carol is a notable businesswoman. She serves on boards like BC Achievement and the Harvard Business School Canadian Advisory Board and has earned accolades including being named one of BC's most influential women and the Order of British Columbia in 2021. She has honorary doctorates from UBC and BCIT and a Queen Elizabeth II's Diamond Jubilee Medal. Congratulations. Entrepreneurship runs in the Lee's family as she recently entered the restaurant business with Chinatown Barbecue, which we'll have to get into that, which has become a local hit and contributed to the area's revitalization. Today, we'll explore Carol Lee's multifaceted life, her community initiatives, and her vision for Vancouver's Chinatown. Carol, welcome to Coastal Front.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thank you. So we're going to start by introducing to our listeners and viewers a little bit more about Chinatown Foundation. It was an initiative that you launched in 2011, but I'm sure you were thinking about it before that time. So why don't you start by helping our listeners and viewers understand a little bit more about your original vision and how this came about over 10 years ago now?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Was born and raised in Vancouver, second generation Chinese Canadian. And so I spent in my early days a lot of time in Chinatown. And like many people, you sort of move away. I went to school in the States and I came back and it was about 2004. And it was kind of distressed to see the state of the neighborhood because growing up, it was a wonderful, bustling neighborhood. Really felt like community. So I set my office up there. We had a building that we've owned since 1921. And over the course of the next, 8 years, I could see that if we didn't do something to help save the neighborhood, it would eventually just disappear. Okay. So in 2011, I decided that I would try and bring together a group of individuals that I thought could help with the revitalization. Okay. People like, my father, Bob Lee, Brant Louie, and Caleb Chan, like a number of notable people who really cared and had spent a lot of time in Chinatown. And the mission was to help revitalize this neighborhood, this historic neighborhood, while preserving its irreplaceable cultural heritage. And I've said before that sometimes you don't realize how important things are to you until you're at the risk of losing them.
I see.
And I think that was really it for me. Like growing up as a young person, I didn't really love going to Chinatown. In those days, you actually didn't want to be Chinese. You wanted to blend in. I think everybody wants to have the sense of belonging. We grew up in the North Shore. There were that many Chinese families. So it wasn't a place that, was like, oh, I love this neighborhood. But, many years later, sort of seeing it in the sort of the decaying state that it was in, knowing that if we didn't do something collectively as a community, it would eventually disappear. That's kind of why I thought, you know what, this is an important piece of our Canadian history. Mm-hmm. And more than that, I grew up in Vancouver, but so many of my friends, Chinese and non-Chinese, had such warm, nostalgic feelings towards this neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Like when you were growing up in that generation, people didn't have a lot of money. So if you wanted to take your family out for dinner, it was probably the only place you could afford.
Yeah, absolutely.
So many people had very fond memories of Chinatown. And I thought that it was worth saving this neighborhood for that, but also because of what it represented. It was really, if you think about the contribution of the Chinese railroad workers, Canada probably wouldn't have been a country if they hadn't come here to finish that last leg of the railroad.
Yeah.
We could easily be a part of America today. And so for me, Chinatown really was the physical legacy of that sacrifice and contribution. So there was a number of reasons why I thought it was important to save.
Well, that's really good. That's a great background on how this came about. And I agree with you. I mean, I remember my grandfather taking me down there as an experience. I mean, I'm born in the early 70s, so going down there as a child once or twice to see it. I grew up on the island, so I didn't get a chance to go there very often, but it was quite a fun, very lively environment.
Yeah.
You talk about wanting to revitalize Chinatown. You have these memories as a child that you reflect on now, and you have maybe more positive memories than you might have had at the time. When did you came back, you said 2004.
Yeah.
But you must have come back at times before that, maybe you have school breaks, and there was a point at which this changed, right? Chinatown changed from being something that you and others in the community would be proud of to something today you would look at and go, we need to fix this.
Yeah.
Was there a certain decade or era or time that you, Carol, that you saw that pivot, that change when you look back now? Was it the 1990s? Was it the 1980s?
1990s, I think. I would say the 1980s was still kind of a peak. It was still booming. But it was sort of in the early 90s that things started to change. And it was a multitude of reasons.
Yeah?
What
do you think they were?
Well, a lot of urban issues that have been plaguing many big cities, homelessness, drug addiction, poverty.
Yeah.
But also with the Chinese, that was the place that everybody wanted to go. But as it became so successful that they started making communities outside of Chinatown, so in Richmond and in Burnaby and Coquitlam, so all of a sudden people are spreading around, and there was no longer a need to come to Chinatown if you needed to have Chinese food or had to buy groceries.
Yeah.
So there's other options.
Okay. So what does revitalization look like for you today? Like we're in 2023. You've been at this with this foundation that you started in 2011. So we're 12 years.
Yeah.
What kind of progress have you made, and where do you want to see this go?
So when I first told my father about it in 2011, he actually was very discouraging. He goes, "It is impossible." And my father was no stranger to taking on big projects. He did UBC Properties Trust, and we thought that was crazy or going to be really difficult. But he said, "I want you to know this is going to be 10 times harder than what I did at UBC." And I think that sometimes it's good going into a project being naive. So, and I'm also kind of stubborn. So I thought that first of all, like
two good pieces to the formula.
Not how hard. But if we don't, my response to him, but if we don't do it, who's going to do it? And so I think that was I grew up in that kind of family. We think about community a lot. We like working to make things better for a greater good. So I eventually persuaded him to support me in doing this. And I think that the other thing is I was able to convince him that it was worth saving. He had a very different vantage point than I did when he was growing up. So he was born in 1933. It was a ghetto. You weren't allowed outside of the neighborhood. So once you got to a stage where you were successful, you could move out. You didn't really want to think about Chinatown the same way. You were trying to get out. Where I looked at it quite differently. This sort of nostalgic neighborhood, it was an important part of the fabric of the city, the province, and the country. So we eventually kind of saw eye to eye.
Yeah.
And he was a huge champion, I think, in the end. And when we've got this big project that we're working on right now that I'm almost completed, but it's a social housing project at 58 West Hastings.
Yeah.
And, once again, he goes, it's going to be impossible. But it's like nothing is impossible. We send people to the moon.
Yeah.
How hard can it be? And so sometimes you just have to be persistent and not give up. And I think
naive and stubborn.
And naive, definitely stubborn. And naive helps as well.
Yeah, sometimes does. Good for you. Well, that's a good story.
Yeah.
It's interesting you talk about how when you were younger, you had this mixed feelings of you had enjoyed going to Chinatown, but you also wanted to blend into the Canadian society. And one of the things that I think is really great about where we're at today in our society here in Canada is we champion culture, and it's like we're not asking we need to obviously have people assimilate to a certain extent so we can have a conversation in a common language. But it's nice to see today where we can have that proper balance, better balance of saying, hey, you know what, the Chinese Canadians and Chinese families that came here from the other side of the water had a huge contribution to our society. So let's name that and let's be excited about it.
I think so. And we have a saying. So we opened the first permanent exhibition space to tell the Chinese Canadian story. It's called the Chinatown Storytelling Center. And really, for me, the the driving motto was, you need to have pride in your past to have hope for the future.
Okay, nice.
And I think that, for me growing up, it wasn't, and I know a lot of other people that felt the same way. It was hard to be Chinese back then.
Mm-hmm.
There was still a lot of discrimination, and so you tried very hard to blend in. And I think part of the mission for me is to make people feel proud of that history. And I think it's working.
Yeah.
We get a lot of young people coming in, and so that they have a chance to see it in a very different light than the way I saw it.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, we're going to talk about a few of these items, like dealing with the issues of racism and Asian hate in a moment. But I want to keep on the theme of revitalizing Chinatown. Now, you're doing this also not just at the foundation level, but as an entrepreneur, you've got your restaurant, Chinatown Barbecue. Now, I made a point of making sure I ate lunch just before we got into this. Before we got into this, because otherwise I was going to start salivating. But fill me in, because that sounds like a great place to eat. So what is Chinatown Barbecue? How did that come about?
Well, so it was part of this overall revitalization strategy. And if you think about the economic revitalization, I think that in any vibrant Chinatown, you have a bustling food scene.
Yeah.
So the restaurants that I was seeing that were opening didn't really, for me, satisfy what I was looking for. Chinatown restaurants tended to be sort of multi-generational. I love seeing a grandparent with some parents and then some children. And the restaurants that were opening didn't really, they weren't places that I necessarily could take my grandmother. So I told my father, I said, the foundation can't do it. It's too risky to do a restaurant. I said, I'm going to do it on my own. He just about shot me again. And he goes, well, you don't know anything about restaurants, and it is the worst business ever. But I said, I want to show people what an authentic revitalization could look like. So I rented a space. It was a pottery store, hired somebody to help do the design. And then we opened 6 years ago. And I'm very proud to say, unfortunately, my dad's not around anymore. But, according to Google, at least anyways, we have 1,400 reviews. We're the highest rated Chinese restaurant in Vancouver. But
really,
we're one of the highest rated restaurants, period. Same as Le Crocodile, Il Giardino. And I think that for me, it was another experiment. Most of the things that I do, it's like, how do we build a case study around so other people can learn from what we've done, good or bad? And so for me, I try to take all of the elements from any Chinese restaurant in Chinatown. But if I looked after the marketing, the branding, the design, the decor, the sort of the front end, how does that translate? And, it's been successful both financially, but I think also for the people that work there. Mm-hmm. During COVID, we didn't have any turnover. They love working there. And so my goal in the beginning was I wanted to be the best owner of a, boss at a Chinese restaurant. And I think it
How many seats does the restaurant have?
48.
And what's the kind of cuisine? I mean,
so it was something
just
called
generically Chinese barbecue.
I know, generically Chinese barbecue, which is kind of a comfort food for Cantonese people.
Okay.
And so we grew up eating that. My dad every Saturday would go to Chinatown and pick up Chinese barbecue. So there was a very well-known restaurant like 2 doors down that had burned down.
Okay.
And I managed to have the number of the cashier. So I got in touch with some of the staff and I hired them to come and work for me. And that was the reason why I did it. It wasn't like I had a big aspiration, like, I'm going to open a Chinese barbecue restaurant. But here are these people that had been at a restaurant for 30 years, now had nowhere to work. So I hired them to come and work for me. And I think that for me, I also love the idea of elevating or making more popular something that is maybe not that many people know about it. Yeah. So for, I would say, Westerners, probably Chinese or Cantonese barbecue wasn't that well known. So I wanted something that was very accessible. So if you were Chinese speaking, you would go in and somebody would help you and you could eat something.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, I'll put that on my list. My kids, I have an 11, 10, and 7-year-old, and we normally go to Connie's on 4th because we're over in the Kitsilano side. Mm-hmm. And they always want to go to Connie's, so I think I'll divert their attention. We'll
try and come
down.
And see us sometime.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned the Chinatown Storytelling Center. When did that open again?
So we opened in November of 2021. It was kind of during COVID.
Yeah.
It was delayed, but we decided that we're going to open it anyways. And that was it was a huge deal. As I said, that was the first permanent exhibition space to tell the story of the Chinese Canadian experience.
Yeah.
And
if I went there, what would I learn in going in there as a local non-Chinese Canadian going in there, what would something I learned that would make kind of fascinate me?
Well, I think sort of like the contribution of those early settlers and the sort of sacrifices that they made. But, once again, talking about the railroad, like that would have probably been impossible to connect Eastern Canada to the Pacific without the Chinese railroad workers. So that made us a country.
Yeah.
But the other was, in the Second World War, the Chinese soldiers that volunteered to fight who weren't Canadian citizens basically decided that they were going to fight for a country that didn't want them, but they eventually won the right for all minorities to vote. So I think there's some chapters that make you look at what people's contributions are very differently. And, the way we did the Storytelling Center, I mean, yes, this is sort of a story through the eyes of, Chinatown, but it's kind of the immigrant story. And the one thing that I love so much about it is that people from different nationalities have gone through, and it's like, that is my story. We had somebody working with us on the project when we just got started, and he was from Russia. And he wrote us a note after, and it brought us most of us to tears. But he said, it made me think of my own journey, of my father's sacrifices for me to come to this country. And I think that's what we all need to do, is think about this country is that we're all immigrants, that they're all contributing to what we are in different ways.
Yeah, well said. I want to talk for a moment about the revitalization vision you have. So it's pinned down to these three ideas of cultural, economic, and physical. How do you, and I'm going to talk about, I guess, the combination of physical / economical with respect to real estate development. In my short time here in Vancouver as an adult in the last 20 years, we've watched this kind of shift of building activity in downtown East Side. I think of the Woodward building first, and we've seen other buildings kind of going up, and Chinatown is probably going to start to see some of this activity as just the population grows and there needs to be more places to live. Yeah. So how do you balance the need between keeping things historic and traditional in Chinatown, but also supporting modern development?
I think that is one of the best questions. I mean, what we say at the foundation, development with no preservation is just as bad as preservation with no development. It basically is, it's this very fine line. We have to keep changing. So you don't want to be...
line. I like that.
Yeah, you don't want to be stagnant, but there's this balance of making sure that you honor history, honor the past, embrace the culture, but we need to progress, and you're absolutely right. Like there's development going on, and as long as it's consistent with kind of the spirit of the neighborhood, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As we mentioned just before we started filming, we had Melissa Carmen Lee on, who's the CEO for the Chinese Canadian Museum that just recently opened. You also have a business improvement association, I believe.
Yes.
How do you work, Carol, with these different groups? Like, do you collaborate at all with Melissa's group or with the BIA? I also know you mentioned Ken Sim, and Melissa had mentioned he's got a mayor's satellite office in Chinatown now. So can you talk to a minute about how you're collaborating with other community leaders to...
I think it's essential for us to get where we need to go. Collaboration is the only way. So, the museum just opened up in June. We work also with the Sun Yat-sen Garden. So I think that we're launching a three-way ticket of some sort with the Chinese Canadian Museum and the Sun Yat-sen Garden, the Chinatown Storytelling Center. So on the cultural side, that is kind of what we collaborate in that way. On the economic side, we work very closely with the BIA and the Vancouver Chinatown Merchants Association. And we usually do most of our projects that we work on include them as well as the garden. So I totally agree with you that you will go way farther if we all work together.
Yeah.
And I think that has been the foundation of why we've been successful at the things that we've done, is that we try and be a good partner and a good collaborator.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Ken Sim, who we both know quite well, is Vancouver's first Chinese Canadian mayor. I think that's politically correct way to
Yes,
say it.
absolutely.
So has Ken had a pretty material impact on this revitalization effort that you're undertaking?
He has. And, we're very grateful. It was one of his campaign promises that he was going to help revitalize Chinatown, and he
Yeah.
absolutely stuck to that promise. The council passed unanimously a motion in January of this year to uplift Chinatown. We work closely with the city, and they did open their office sometime this summer, and Ken has been a great champion of Chinatown. I will say this, that this is the first time since I've been working on the revitalization effort that all three levels of government have been aligned.
Really?
So we got a
Great.
major grant from the federal government through Pacific Can and Minister Sajan of $1.8 million, and then a $2.2 million grant from the provincial government through Premier Eby and Minister Popham. So these will be spent, hopefully deployed within the next couple of months. And you will see some sort of major lighting infrastructure projects. I think that will help change the way people look at the neighborhood. So, and then that you combine that with a $2.1 million that the city with Ken have used for their Uplift Chinatown sort of mandate. And so things are all moving in the right direction. So we're really glad.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
When I think about making a urban center a little bit more visitor friendly and livable, I think of what I would almost describe as the Europification of areas. Like when I think of when I go to major cities in Europe, especially on the evenings and weekends, they'll take areas that may have automobile traffic during the day, gets cut off at nighttime on the weekends, so that they can have outdoor cafes and that type of thing. We know what this current council is. It started with the previous council, but the current council, city council, are really big on pushing to have more outdoor dining areas that sort of bleed into even parking, what used to be parking spots on the road. When I think of Chinatown as a child, I think about neon lights and strings of lights and people moving around and people having, food to eat. And so is there any ways in which you could see maybe either temporarily, on a Granville Strip, for example, where all those bars are, in the summertime now, I think the Vancouver police have done a good job of just cutting off traffic entirely so that young people can just walk drunk from the Roxy to whatever the other place is. Do you have any a vision about this for Chinatown to make it more pedestrian friendly and maybe bring in, because you need buyers, right? You need people to come in to spend money.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. The key to revitalization is bringing people back to the neighborhood.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
So our job is to give them reasons to come back. So along this line, we started in 2021. So during COVID, Chinatown was very badly hit. So the rise of anti-Asian racism, and then people weren't going out anyways and definitely didn't want to go to Chinatown. So we decided that we were going to have a festival called Light Up Chinatown.
Okay.
And we put that together. And, the first year we had 5,000 or 6,000. Last year we had 8,000. This year we had almost 20,000 people that showed up. But it was to do exactly what you talked about.
Yeah.
It was to give people an idea of what it could be.
Yeah.
So we had lights, we had food collaborations. It was electric. And I think that, the first year we had it, the merchant said, we haven't seen this kind of hustle and bustle, in a couple of decades. And so our job is to show people what is possible. And so absolutely, that is something that we should aspire to having. And I think this lighting infrastructure, where we've got money from both the federal and provincial governments, will help enable that to happen.
What's that going to do? When you say lighting, can you talk about a bit more? Are we going to go back to the 1960s neon lights?
Well, we have a little bit of money for neon, so we'll sort of test that out. But so for the first amount of money, what we were planning to do is light up all of the cultural icons. So the Millennium Gate, the exterior wall of the Sun Yat-sen Garden, the Chinese Cultural Center, there's a beautiful museum building. And then there's a huge facade on Pender Street, some of the historic buildings. And then we've got lights going in all the trees, like in the 16 blocks. So you start saying, we're open for business, come and see us. And, maybe people will just start driving through, even if they don't want to get their car out at night, just to come and see how pretty the lights might look. And so I think this is going to be the beginning of I think, a dramatic change in the way people look at the neighborhood.
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah. I hope you're right. I hope you achieve this. This actually leads into neighborhood safety. Vancouver police highlighted that violent crime in the city had increased by more than 7% in 2021 compared to the pre-COVID levels. In the fall of 2021, the department said that 4 random attacks were happening every day. Now, Chinatown, as we both know, is really just right on the edge of the tragic downtown east side that has become a real problem for all of us. So how do you manage that? Because you're not going to have the resources to, deal with that issue. I've got to assume, admittedly, I haven't been down to Chinatown as a pedestrian in a while, but I assume that you're going to see a lot of these homeless people working their way and living in, nooks and crannies within, and it's not a knock against them. These people are, in a really tragic state of affairs. But, if you're going to try to attract people, and I think about the story that Melissa told about when she was 7 years old and her mom would drop her off in front of her mom's favorite bakery in Chinatown and then drive around trying to find some parking. And she had no concerns of leaving her 7-year-old daughter on the street in Chinatown.
We were all like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe it's too optimistic to think we can get back to that, but I'd like to think we can get to something better than what we have today. So how do we deal with this whole safety issue?
Well, absolutely, we can get to a better place. It's any kind of problem that's complex like this will require a comprehensive approach for a solution. There's no one silver bullet, but there's lots of little things that can go on that can kind of lead us to a better state of safety. So, one of the things that Ken had said, like out of the gate, was he was going to hire an additional 100 police officers and 100 additional mental health nurses.
Yeah.
So they've kind of done that. So that's like one piece of it.
Yeah.
I think that what we're trying to do, because I always like to be part of a solution. So I spoke earlier of the 58 West Hastings project. So that's probably going to be one of the largest social housing projects in Vancouver. In fact, Chris Schifferland is out on Thursday. She's going to be making an announcement on housing. She'll do it from that building. And
great.
She was,
Can you take a minute to talk about it a bit more? Because I think most people don't know about it.
I would love to.
Okay.
So it took 13 years to put this project together. I had my first meeting in 2011. But the idea was that our philosophy at the foundation was that, for us to be successful, also our neighbor had to be healthy and successful. So you can imagine we're a small foundation, and we had to convince the board that the first $30 million that I was going to raise was not for Chinatown. It was actually for the downtown east side. So it was a very ambitious project. It's $150 million if you include the land that the city vended in. All 3 levels of government, along with Vancouver Coastal Health. So they're going to run a 50,000 square foot integrated health facility. But we like this idea of having something where, it would make a statement. And I think by the time we're finished, I used to think, it'll be the gold standard. It will be the Rolls Royce of social housing in Canada. Besides the 50,000 square foot integrated health facility, we have a community partnership program. And one of the people on our board is Martha Piper, who was president emeritus of UBC. So she's was one of the co-chairs of the fundraising committee. And she goes, no, I think we need to do more. So we kept pushing it. And so we came up with this idea for a community partnership program, because we want the people that are living there to feel that it's a community within a community.
Okay.
So we've already signed up 40 companies under 3 different pillars: health and wellness, life skills and mentoring, and experiences, so that these companies will provide goods and services. So we have Deloitte, Dress for Success, Nature's Path, the Vancouver Canucks, the Whitecaps, the Lions. I mean, this is really extraordinary. Wow. Most social housing projects wouldn't have any program. But that's what I think we can do as a community, and that's why I actually like calling this community housing, because it took a community to put it together.
Yeah.
So, and then the last piece is that, we have a gala every year, and last year, Martha Sturdy, the artist, and Angela Grossman came as guests of Tom Gautreaux. And they were so inspired by this housing project, they said, we want to have an art program for this building. Said, we know so many artists that kind of had roots in the downtown east side of Chinatown. So this year's gala, we had 7 artists that auctioned off items that we raised the money to go to the building, but there'll be replicas of all of these pieces in the building. So we had Doug Copeland, Angela, Ken Lum, who did the Vancouver East Van Cross, as well as Stan Douglas, who was the representative for Canada in the 2022 Venice Biennale. So he had a very well-known, iconic piece. He's a photographer. It's called Every Building on 100 West Hastings. So I'm in 58. So it was it's the whole block. It was 21 high-resolution images that were sutured together, and it's 16 feet long.
Really?
So it hasn't been available for decades. There's one in the VAG collection, I think one in the Museum of Houston, Fine Arts Museum in Houston. But he gave us the artist proof, the one that was left. And so he gave that to us. And so it was an incredible auction to have, the likes of Lawrence Paul and Dana Claxton,
Wow.
So we had all of this done. And I think that what was amazing about it was listening to the artists and why it was so important for them to do it. Somebody like a Ken Lum. So we said, okay, tell us why you wanted to be involved in this. He was born in Strathcona. His grandfather worked as a cook at the Only Seafood. His father was a waiter at the Smiling Buddha. It's right here. His mother worked at laundry on Kiefer and Main, and that's why people got on. So you can sort of see all of these ties, and that is all about community. So when I called him, he now lives in Philadelphia, and we reached out, and he goes, I'd love to be involved. We took him on a tour of the building, and he goes, this is amazing. He goes, I actually grew up in social housing. So I hope that people see social housing as a way of helping elevate people, how to provide support so that they can, move on and in life and feel that they can go on and do more.
Wow, that's
so yeah,
great. I agree. And so 58 West Hastings, how many people with this? I mean, in addition to the healthcare services and all the other businesses that are going to be supporting the people who live there as well as the local area residents, how many people are actually going to live in this building? So
there'll be 231 units of housing, but some of them will be like 25% of those are 2 bedrooms. So you can see that probably 300 people or more
really
could live there.
Wow.
And so I think that you can do a lot with that kind of scale, and that's why it was worth it for me. It was a real slog. Once again, all of these different, I had to go through, and this is where perseverance and not giving up helps. But 3 different mayors, 3 city planners, 3 city you just have to keep going through the regimes, but finding people along the way that believe in what you're doing and are willing to help you. And so I found a lot of good people along the way. We worked closely with CMHC and BC Housing, and wouldn't have happened without them.
Well, good for you. This is the kind of stories we want to tell. I mean, even for the young people who listen to this podcast, to give them some inspiration to just don't give up.
No.
You got a dream, just keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned amongst those different companies, Dress for Success. We had Amy Robichaud.
Yes.
Robichaud.
Yeah.
She's
awesome.
Yeah, she is great.
Yeah.
We interviewed her maybe about a year ago.
Yeah.
And it was a really enlightening conversation.
Yeah. And those are the kind of people we want to partner with. We have Vancouver Public Library and, the Vancouver Art Gallery. It just goes on. And almost I stopped asking because everybody said yes.
Is that right?
So we will figure out how to operationalize it. It's easy to give away the tickets, but how do what do the other programs look like? So that's what we're working on now. Yeah.
Is it safe? I've got 3 young kids I mentioned, 11, 10, and 7. Is it safe for me to take my kids down to Chinatown today?
I think it is, but it's like everywhere in the city. You mentioned earlier 4 random attacks, every day.
Yeah.
So yes, there's probably a little bit more given our proximity to the downtown east side, but I think for the most part, I feel safe. My mother is 89. She comes down all the time.
Yeah.
And so I think that I hope that we can make it safer, though, because there is this perception that it's not. And I think that one of the best ways that we can have more people come is to make them feel that it is a safe place to visit. And that's why we do this Light Up Chinatown Festival every year.
When is the Light Up Chinatown Festival?
So it's the first weekend after Labor Day weekend. So I think next year's the 8th or the 9th.
Yeah.
But it is electric. It's really fun. And, this year we have a passport system because we want everybody to walk through the entire 16 blocks.
Yeah.
So we had great prizes. So we had Beyonce
16
tickets.
blocks within Chinatown?
Well, not 16, but if you go Main Street, it's maybe 12, something around there.
I didn't even know. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's big.
But it was great. So we had 1,600 people fill out the passport because we had great prizes.
Right.
We had tickets to Coldplay, tickets to Beyonce. So we're trying to attract a different demographic. We
Yeah.
had like a gift certificate from Aritzia, so it
Yeah.
worked out great.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's neat.
Yeah, it's fun.
If I haven't been down to Chinatown in a long time. I haven't taken my kids down there since they were.
I'll invite you for lunch.
Okay, well, yeah, I'd love to come.
Okay.
I remember taking our daughters, this before COVID. There was the Chinese New Year's parade.
Yes.
And that's so exciting to watch.
Yeah.
When does that typically happen? I guess because it's a different calendar system.
Different calendars. But I think Chinese New Year this year is like February 12th, so it's around that weekend.
Yeah. Are you involved in that at all?
No.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
I do think, back to our beginning of our conversation, you mentioned the shift and the change of Chinatown, and when things started kind of go downhill was partly a result of people going other places. And you mentioned Richmond. I know a lot of people go to Richmond's night market.
Yes.
So is that something that would be part of your vision for the future, to start having some more lively night events that could be done in Chinatown?
Absolutely.
Or is that there already? I don't even know about it.
No, not really.
Okay.
But that would absolutely be part of a vision on, how you could activate Chinatown at night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I wanted to go...
But the safety thing comes back into
Right.
that. So, there's a lot of pieces that have to kind of work before you can get there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair. So if I went down to Chinatown in the daytime with my kids, what would be some, maybe you can name a couple of really great places other than your restaurant to go check out? Like, are there shops that I should see? Obviously there's your storytelling center, and there's Melissa's museum.
But you could go to like Newtown Bakery.
Okay.
There's some great, tea shops down there. I would say Dollar Meats if you needed to get some appliances, Forum stores. There's lots of little, I would call them hidden gems.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's sort of what we try and do when we've got Light Up Chinatown, is have a passport. So people actually have to get stamps so that they have these discoveries where, wow, I didn't know about that store. So around Lunar New Year, I think that we've had Taste of Chinatown before. It's sort of like a walking food tour of Chinatown. And I think that we might be doing that again at Chinese New Year this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the stores that used to be down there,
Yes.
Ming Wo.
Oh, Ming Wo.
Yeah.
Was a fantastic store.
Yeah, my wife loves shopping there too much.
Yeah.
It's a great store.
Yeah.
They've got one on Broadway and one on West 4th, but I remember seeing the news when they made the decision to shut down their store in Chinatown, and they cited that it was because of all the risk and potential risk to their employees, that they weren't getting as much business. Are you starting to see companies like them revisit coming back into Chinatown yet?
Not yet, but a little bit.
Okay.
But, I was actually at a meeting with one of the owners, so Fontaine, and she said to it was the new council back then, not this council, but it was 4 years ago. I'm begging you to do something. So you can imagine how hard it is for somebody when they beg in public.
Yeah, sure.
That you need to do something. But it's just, I think it's a very challenging problem that you can sort of see why it's like, well, what do we do? But if we don't start taking it apart and dealing with little pieces of it, we're not going to get anywhere. And I think that there seems to be some appetite lately that we're going to have to start looking at, what things do we need to get done. And I applaud Premier Eby, who this year said, I'm going to own it. Like, that's the first politician I've heard that says, I'm going to do something about it. So that means a lot to people like me that are working in Chinatown. And I think he is the person who can make things happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I agree with your point of, sometimes when you're met with such a astronomical, task in front of you, sometimes the best thing to do is just start doing something little. Like, just to get started, right?
Totally.
Like your idea of just doing enhanced lighting throughout Chinatown will be that one step movement forward to get other people buying into the idea of like, oh, well, if you do that, now maybe we start, now you can see the paint needs to be better. We have to paint this because it's lit up now. And right. And I think that's a really good approach to this.
And, for me, community is all about, if we all do a little bit, it gets better. And so that's why, for me, it's like, I feel lucky to work with so many different organizations and nonprofits and individuals and corporations that are all now kind of moving towards like, well, let's see what we can do together.
Yeah. Well, on that note, let's talk about how our listeners, we have a lot of local Vancouverites, people who are very successful in their careers. like to give back to the community by way of their volunteer hours or by money or both. You're a foundation, you're a registered charity. I did look you up on the CRA website. I was really impressed by your low administration fees and how that's how I always.
I'm a volunteer, that's why.
I was really impressed. I mean, you have a fairly small operating budget. It looks like it's only about $3 million a year. If I got
no, less than that. I think
$2 million. So, okay,
yeah.
But you're putting the money, allocating where it should go to, which is great to see. But if you want to make appeal to people listening to this today, what can they do to get involved? Is there volunteer opportunities? Is it really just donations?
Definitely volunteer opportunities for people of any age and any skill set.
Okay.
They can donate if they want to on our website. So we're at ChinatownFoundation.org. But for me, when we have our job is to inspire people to want to get involved in whatever way they can.
Yeah.
So some people don't have time; they want to donate money. Some people have time, and we love that too. And sometimes it's just going to be coming to the neighborhood and going to a restaurant or buying something in a store, a little shop, and supporting local.
Yeah.
So there's so many things people can do.
Yeah. Great. Well, this has been an excellent conversation. Carol Lee, you're the founder and chairwoman for the Chinatown Foundation and also the proud owner of Chinatown Barbecue, which I plan to bring my wife and kids to have dinner at. You're doing an amazing job with the foundation, and appreciate the work you do for our community, and keep going.
Thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed it, Andrew.
Thank you.
Yeah.